Hello and welcome. My name is Elena and I'd like to talk about some of the books I've been reading over the past 5 weeks. I have been sitting here for a while debating and telling myself maybe, Elena, just let this one go. The state of my short-term memory is in a true spiral, and so there's just no way I'm going to be able to remember all the names and faces and plot lines and subplots and destinations, and it's a lot. But instead I let that thought go and decided we're going to do it anyway because it's not about perfection here, and I do actually kind of want to talk about some of these books. So starting off with The Fellowship of the Ring, yes, I finally got to Tolkien's trilogy. I thoroughly enjoyed this trilogy. You know, I think for the longest time I had been putting it off because I just thought this might be a little bit too fantastical. I'm just not really in the mood to track a bunch of, make-believe characters and make-believe forests. But it turned out that it's not so fantastical. It's quite easy to follow. And Tolkien is a master storyteller, which everybody knew this. Everybody knew this already. Late to the game, growing up, Tolkien was not part of my repertoire. I had never heard of him. He only became a household name after Peter Jackson's films. So diving in, The Fellowship of the Ring, the first book, is my favorite out of the books. And The Two Towers is my favorite movie. And I think that it's just simply because of the battle at Helm's Deep is just epic. But I think the first one, for the simple reason of just like the introducing all the characters, all the backstories, the folklore. Bilbo Baggins is celebrating his 111th birthday and he's a little hobbit. And there's a Frodo Baggins who he loves dearly. And then there's Gandalf the Grey, who attends these celebrations, and he's a wizard. As you all know this. I'm saying this like you've never heard of these people before. And of course, Bilbo at the end of the night disappears by donning that ring. And so Gandalf grows suspicious, and he decides to search far and wide to prove his theories. And as he does, he realizes that a fellow wizard, Saruman, has now joined evil forces with Sauron. And he returns and basically tells Frodo that he must flee and take the ring with him. And he tells them, you must go to Rivendell. He is joined on this journey by Sam, the true hero of this trilogy, and Meriadoc and Pippin, also hobbits. They are faced with, the 9 Nazgul. They meet Strider at an inn. Frodo gets stabbed and barely actually makes it to Rivendell, which is where the Fellowship is formed. And again, as we're introduced to more men, more elves, more dwarves, more creatures, more inhabitants of Middle Earth, far, far away from Bag End. It's obviously a story about, good versus evil. And why is it that those type of stories never get tired? Right? It's kind of like, was it Edmund Burke that said, evil is what prevails when good men do nothing, in that sort of vein. And I'm not going to recall the entire trilogy, okay? I'm sure you are all very familiar with it. But again, I was surprised at how musical the text was. I mean, a lot of these backstories are told, even Gollum's Smeagol's story is told through song. And of course, Frodo is separated from that original fellowship. The fellowship breaks up, and Merry and Pippin marched on Isengard with Treebeard and his horde of trees. I think my one question is the story of Tom Bombadil. You know, I get that he's in that forest and he has a sweetheart and he sings that song constantly, but like if he could actually have left the forest, he could have played a pivotal role in the trilogy in helping Frodo and achieve his journey. So that's, you know, we ended up from the Shire and then we moved on to Stalingrad. There's just no way I am going to be able to recall all of the characters of this tomb. But it was written by, let me start by saying, Stalingrad, written by Vasily Grossman. Vasily Grossman was a Ukrainian Jew. I think he was actually named Iosif, but then his nanny changed his name to Vasily to sort of Russify it, and his family just went along with it in, I think, Berdichev, Ukraine. His mother was actually held at a labor camp and shot by the Gestapo. He was a war correspondent working for, I think it was Krasnaya Zvezda or Red Star. During World War II, he saw the Battle of Stalingrad, Kursk, he's been to Berlin. He was also one of the first accounts of the Holocaust. I think it was the camp of Treblinka. He caught the first, he published the first work on Holocaust camps, allegedly. One thing that struck me most starting out with Stalingrad is it's, you know, apart from obviously when you kind of approach a book like this, you're kind of like, okay, let's buckle in for this long ride. I think there's an introduction here that mentions that Vasily Grossman was obviously loved Tolstoy, and he wanted this book, along with the following book that follows the end of Stalingrad, Life and Fate, that I have not started reading it yet, to be the 20th century version of War and Peace. This is not that, okay? Again, he is a journalist at heart, and so he's very straightforward. There's not a lot of flowery language, rhetoric, diction, the syntax. It's very simple. It really does sort of read like an account of something, right? And, you know, instead of foreshadowing something, he will say like, you know, and this event foreshadowed this. But it truly revolves around a family, the Shaposhnikov family, and their matriarch. Their father died before the war, and so Alexandra, Alexandra Vladimirovna Shaposhnikova, she has 3 daughters and a son who is in a labor camp and is barely mentioned. Honestly, I didn't even really realize, I kind of missed him in this book. So, you know, there's, but the son who is in a labor camp, Alexandra has adopted him as, you know, her grandson. And so he actually lies about his age. His name is Seryoja. He lies about his age to join with the army. And so she's, you know, worried about him. And obviously there's many characters in this book, but they all revolve or evolve and know something to do with this family, or know someone that knows this family. For example, there's a character called Mostavskoy, who is or was really great friends with Alexandra's husband, who again is dead. But he's this 65-year-old longtime Bolshevik who was a clandestine communist organizer in like 1910 and served in the Russian Civil War, and he is now looking again to make a ruckus. And then we have the ex-husband of one of the daughters, Zhenya, and his name is Krimov, Nikolai Grigorievich Krimov. He's around 45, and he plays a pivotal role he becomes a key leader in the Stalingrad defense, as well as Senior Lieutenant Filyashkin, who's not related to any of the characters, but he's also, the story is actually based on a true story, an episode in the Stalingrad offensive. And his real name is Lieutenant Anton Kuzmich Dragan. One thing that I have to note here, and is that this book, when trying to be published, and I think it was the 50s, was heavily censored. And I mean, my aunt, who is Russian and lives in Russian, when my mother told her I was reading this book, she's like, propaganda. So yes, there's just, this book is not truly the original version of Stalingrad, right? Like, there have been 28 edits, if not more, to this book. So keep that in mind, right? That you're reading a book that by an author who wanted to be published, but was heavily censored, and to be published, to be seen. We have now come this far to this version. But there are certain characters that are mentioned in this book. For example, I think Ivan Novikov, who's a coal mine shaft driller. And his story was included just solely at the request of Soviet politicians to represent the sacrifices of workers, of laborers. And so there's also accounts of German soldiers and German lieutenants and colonels serving in the army, and their thoughts on Russian life, and how a dissident then became like the largest supporter of Hitler. And so we're faced with a lot of accounts and histories, and then that sort of starts to be weaved in. But we only start to see actual action, like near page 600, the first offensive of the Volga, which that account will haunt me for, I suppose every time I think about it, I will be haunted by that account. It was heartbreaking. So there's a lot to be considered here. So just keep that in mind when you read this, that yes, there is a lot of propaganda, but I would not say don't read it and shy away from it because of the propaganda. It's a work of fiction. It's told by a journalist who lived during that time, based on real characters to some degree. So make of that what you will, if you decide to ever give it a read. But yeah, that's The Shire to Stalingrad. What else did we read? We read The Perfect Spy, or A Perfect Spy by Jean Le Carré. Magnus Pym. You see what's going on. So I read The Night Manager, which was then turned into a short series. All I can say is 3 words: Tom Hiddleston's ass. Yeah, you'll know what I'm talking about. But A Perfect Spy is considered, I think it was Philip Pullman who said, like, this is the best work of English literature of the 20th century. I found it a little bit difficult to follow along just with the bouncing of narratives, right? I had to actually kind of get used to that, and it took me a while. It took me maybe like 100 pages to get used to the, like, oh wait, we're talking about Magnus, but we're actually, like, he's now in boarding school, and it's not a dream, it's him, but it's him at a different time. And so there's just a lot of play with the plot in that way. Yes, it's genius, but again, I'm not, so it took me a while to get used to that as a reader. But it's interesting if you are in search of a spy novel or a thriller. I mean, this is kind of a slow burn, but yes, at the beginning of this book, basically a British Secret Service officer disappears. He goes to the airport and he's supposed to land from Vienna and he never does. And so, of course, his wife is trying to make sense of it. The British Secret Service are trying to make sense of it as they're trying to get ahead of the Americans who think that something is going on in an operation that they're synonymously working with the British. And then, of course, we get to learn the story of Magnus and his very colorful father, who is a crook and even runs for government at some time. But it deals with, you know, an English boy going to boarding school at a young age. His mother is placed in the loony bin, if you will, and his father is a crook and constantly coming to him for, you know, ideas of like how to win at life and telling him that all is fine. But he's constantly one step away from, you know, being thrown into jail. And so he struggles with all of this. He struggles to make friends and he's alone a lot. He struggles with women, with his relationships with women and how that informs his life and decisions and all of that. So yeah, very interesting, very interesting. I also read Muriel Barbery's Gourmet Rhapsody, which is not by any means a continuation of The Great Elegance of a Hedgehog. I read that book and I loved it, but it deals with the food critic that lives in that same building. And he is on his deathbed and he starts craving some sort of, he's smelling a scent, he has a craving and he doesn't know for what for. And all these accounts of the people in his life, the chapters are the accounts of people in his life, his daughters, his wife, the nanny, a chef, how they all perceive him and how he led a very callous Epicurean lifestyle. Very quick read, you can read it in one afternoon. I didn't think much of it. I definitely prefer and highly recommend Elegance of a Hedgehog. What a book. But that's my reading for the past few weeks. It's basically Middlemarch, so maybe I should read Middlemarch next. Middlemarch is a book that I have been trying to... I've started quite a few times and I don't know, it was just never appropriate to continue, and so maybe this spring I'll get there, maybe I won't. But listen, if you need to hear this, let this be said. Read whatever the hell you want. If you are in a mood to read smut, read smut. If you want to read a graphic novel, read a graphic novel. I'm just so grateful that one morning I woke up and made eye contact with the Fellowship of the Rings, and I was like, okay, you know what, I'm just gonna give it a go. And I did. And sometimes that's all it takes. And sometimes it's a lot harder. I read these books physically, but I also listened to them in audiobook. I love to be read to, so that's sort of like my happy place, right? Whatever works for you. And maybe reading is not the answer right now. Severance is back, so hello. That's like reading in itself. But thank you for watching, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.